such a killer track. What a great song. We have Billy Sherwood here. That was from his 2000 album with Chris Squire. And Billy, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thank you.
And then we have another special guest with us, the tour manager for Billy Sherwood's first upcoming solo tour, the one and only Andre Chumley, who is welcome back to Make Weird Music. You got to
Oh,
unmute, Andre.
There we go. So professional. So so good to be back, Anthony. And it's been a while. And yeah, I'm doing what I call virtual tour managing on this one. I won't be physically out with Billy, but I've been doing this a little bit. I've done it a few times with Adrian Ballou, so I'm doing it all from a distance. We have the technology now to do this. So
yes, we
Super
do.
cool. And so we've got Billy in a rehearsal studio next to the Weird Al band, right?
Yes, Weird Al is rehearsing next to me for his tour, which is quite a big tour he's about to embark on. So yeah, it's an interesting day here.
Yeah, I bet. So, Billy, you've got such an incredible history with so many bands, and I don't. It's not just like one genre. I looked on your Wikipedia page. You've got Deep Purple, Toto, Motorhead, Air Supply, John Wetton, Def Leppard, Rat, Fear Factory, Todd Rundgren, Asia, John Five, Edgar Winter, Nectar, and David Cross from King Crimson.
Yeah. Well, I've had a blessed career in that I've managed to be able to work with pretty much virtually almost all of my heroes and my musical icons that I ever wanted to meet. When I started producing records, that afforded me those opportunities. I started my official production career in '93 when I produced an album that was Grammy nominated that year, Paul Rogers record, solo album of his called Muddy Water Blues. And we got David Gilmour and Jeff Beck and Brian May. And I mean, there's so many great guitar players on there. And that record did really, really well. And it was at a time where tribute records weren't really yet a thing as they are now and have been. I mean, the market's pretty saturated at this point. But after that, I was asked to do the same type of things by different labels. And, that back when they had budgets. And so I was like, well, okay, here's my wish list. And they'd say, cool, go at it. So I'd send emails to people and say, hey, I'm making this record and I love your work. I've always wanted to work with you. Would this work for your session fee? Could we do this? And 9 times out of 10, I got yeses from everybody. And that's actually how I became friendly with John Wetton. He was on so many of various tribute records, and then also a project I had called the Prague Collective for years. Um, and to that end, one day I said to John, we've done so much music of other people at this point. I think it'd be kind of fun if we did something together and write something. Do you want to try writing something? He said, well, I could do better than that. I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, I'm about to make a solo album. Would you mind producing it? And I'll come to LA and we can write the whole thing together in your studio. I said, I'm in, let's go. So those kind of moments were made possible by the kind of records I was making. And I have such great memories of all those records and making them and meeting people. And, as a musician who understands everyone has a unique art form unto themselves, even though a guitar is a guitar. It's played by people and sounds completely different in different hands. So I was very mindful to kind of be paying attention when they were doing their overdubs. I go, oh, that's how he's doing that. Okay, cool. I'm going to take that and borrow it and turn it into my own thing. So through that, I was able to just work with so many great people, and it's just been a blessing.
Well, and we sort of ignored the elephant in the room, the Prague elephant in the room. You've been one of the longest standing full time members of Yes in the band's history, which is pretty amazing. Can you tell us about, what's been going on with Yes the last, 10 or 15 years? Well, I know you've been in the band for even longer, but you guys are
Yeah.
still touring and still musically active. Go ahead and share some.
Yeah, well, I mean, my first intersected with the Yes world in about 1988, 89, somewhere in there, because I was making my second album as an artist in a band. The band was called World Trade, signed on Polydor, actually by Derek Shulman, lead singer of Gentle Giant, who was a record company mogul by then. And he loved the band and signed us. And then he left Polydor when our album was released and became the president of Atco Records, where Yes was basically without a lead singer because at the same time on Arista, you had Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe as they were known. And so at Atco was Chris, Tony Kaye, Trevor Rabin, and Alan White. And Derek Shulman said to Chris, as I'm told by them, by Derek, I told Chris, you got to meet this guy. Maybe he's your new lead singer for Yes. And so I got this call from Derek. Chris wants to meet you and have dinner. Do you want to go? I said, are you kidding me? What time? Where are we going? So Chris and I had an amazing time meeting and had a fun dinner and laughed and just talked about the craziness of the music business. And, he knew instantly that, I knew my Yes history very well. And I was querying him on all kinds of different stuff. So we became really close, really fast. And we ended up writing a song shortly after that called The More We Live, which was on the Yes Union album. And I'm gonna actually be playing that in the set of this live solo tour I'm doing. And then from there, it kind of blossomed. I never wanted to be the lead singer in Yes. Everyone wanted me to do it at the time. I was getting a ton of pressure from the record company and lawyers and managers and agents, and Chris really putting the pressure on me. And I kept telling him I'm so honored and flattered, but it's not my destiny right now to be that in Yes. I'm happy to be on the edges of it and whatever you need in terms of production, or I'm enjoying writing stuff with you. But as far as like being John Anderson's role right now in this time period, I knew that they were going to reunite. I could see that, I kind of have a good crystal ball in this business about what's sort of coming, which maybe that's how I've survived it this long, is being able to watch out for the potholes. And I knew that if I went down that road, it was going to be me on a train track, and here comes a massive train. And I did not want my career to stop right there, which it would have been a real problem. It's like the guy who was in Yes and then canned. That wasn't going to work for me on my resume. So I backed out of it and remained in the loop on a production level in those years I think it was 1989 was the Union record. So that's where I began. And then all those years later, 94, I get a phone call from Trevor Rabin. Do you want to come out and tour with the 90125 lineup and being a multi-instrumentalist guy and help us out on stage? I'm like, yeah, let's do that. So I do that. And then after that tour, that lineup breaks up. And, you know, I always thought that's the last time I guess I'm going to be able to work with Yes. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was amazing, but what kind of a bummer because I'd love this to go on. And somehow it just kept coming back around. I got a phone call shortly after that from Chris saying, we're putting the classic lineup back together as it's known with Rick Wakeman, right? And we're making an album called Keys to Ascension. Do you care to mix it? I said, I'd love to do that, So I mixed the record for them. They were all really happy with what I did. And I thought, oh, well, that was fun. I guess that maybe that's the end of it now, we'll just leave it there. And then Chris calls me back and says, we're going to make Keys to Ascension 2, but we want you to produce it. Are you interested? I said, yeah, let's do it. So they all come to my studio in LA that I had at the time. And I produce Keys to Ascension 2, and I work with that lineup. And it's at that point where I'm actually literally mixing the record, and John Anderson is sitting on the couch, and Chris hadn't been to the studio yet because he was late, because he was notoriously late. And I was mixing, and the phone rang, and I stopped for John to be able to make his phone call. And I watched him go, what? Really? Okay. And he hangs the phone up. And I said, is everything okay? And he goes, well, Rick Wakeman just quit again. And I thought, oh my goodness, what? And I'm mixing the record. You guys are supposed to go on tour in a couple of weeks. What? I didn't, I was new to the scene, so I was learning it as I go. I know much more about it now than I did then. And he said, "Yeah, I guess I'm just going to go home and I'll be home." I'm like, "Okay, I'll send mixes." So John left. Chris came over and he knew the news. And I said to him, "Chris, it can't. I'm such a diehard Yes fan, and I was so happy to be involved and working. It can't be that you guys end in my studio. That just cannot happen. Okay, so what the hell? What's gonna go on here? And Chris said, which he always did to me, he says, "Billy, let's start writing some songs and see what happens, and see where things go." Now I wasn't thinking, "Oh, great, here's my moment to start writing a Yes album." I just thought, well, okay, we've been writing songs anyway, let's keep writing songs. And those songs evolved, and he sent them around to Alan and to John and Steve, and before we knew it, we had this album. And it was at that point that they said, "You've been around this long enough at this point, obviously. We want you to join the band as a full member." And I said, "Really? Okay, I'm in. Let's do it." So I joined, and I played guitar alongside Steve on stage, playing live the stuff that we'd done in the studio, playing a few tracks, but more sort of like playing the Rabin era material that Steve wasn't keen on playing. And so I played it. So, there I was playing the solos to Owner of a Lonely Heart and Rhythm of Love and with my favorite band and thinking, how the hell has this worked out to be this way? And then after about, 4 or 5 years of that, I kinda thought, again, I could see the tide changing, and I just kinda knew that this classic lineup was gonna come back into the position. And I said to the guys, "I think at this point, I'm just gonna kind of go back to my world of studio production and making records, so I'm gonna bow out here, and you guys carry on." And they did that. And again, I thought, well, that was the end of my Yes, days. That was amazing. And then I got a phone call, I don't remember, maybe 10 years after that, from Steve Howe of all people, who said, we're making these live DVDs. Do you wanna mix the live DVD? Because we like the way you mix stuff." And I said, "Sure." So I mixed live from Mesa and live from this place, and I ended up, I don't know, remember how, I've lost track of how many of those I did. They were on kind of a roll making those live DVDs or live DVD productions. And so I was kind of back in the loop, which was like, "Oh, this is cool." I mean, I'm in a production role, I'm a happy camper, and they're happy and all's well, so we kept going down that road. And then the most shocking kind of moment of all my Yes history was getting a phone call from, from the band, letting me know that Chris is not doing well and
Mm.
that, he's got this thing going on. And I didn't really know what they were talking about. Chris called me and he said, he goes, "Look, I've got some medical stuff to deal with, and I kind of need you to cover me." And I said, "What do you mean cover you? What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, the tour, we got a tour with Toto coming up, and the crew, they're relying on the work, and the fans have the tickets. I don't want to let anybody down." And I said, "Well, Chris, you're Chris Squire, man. It's like, I guess they're just going to have to wait." And he goes, "Yeah, well, I guess so." I said, "Well, you really should be calling your band and telling them you're gonna have to wait. What are you talking to me for? Call them." And he goes, "Yeah, I guess I will. Okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow." I said, "Okay." Still have no idea what's really on Chris's mind. And he calls me again the next day and he goes into the same thing, "So many people are counting on me and I just really, I just, I want them to go out and do their thing." And I said, "Yeah, but you're Chris Squire, man. What, I told you to call them yesterday. Why didn't you call them?" He goes, "Yeah, I will. I will." I said, "Well, please do, because like it sounds like this is important and you need to make that call, Chris." And he goes, "Yeah, I will. I will. I'll talk to you tomorrow." And this went on for 3 or 4 days.
Oh boy.
Finally, after like day 4 or 5, I said, "Chris, for goodness sake, do you want me to call them and explain the situation? You could just call them." And he says to me in that voice that I'll never forget, his voice just rings in my head how he sounds. He goes, "Billy, you're just not getting it." And I said, "Getting what?" And he says, "I want you to take my place while I'm sick and dealing with this." And I was just stunned, shocked. I had no idea that this is what he was wanting to talk about. And I had to take a minute. I said, "Hang on a minute. What are we talking about here, Chris? Why don't you just postpone the tour?" "What do you mean?" He goes, "No, this is too important. It's got to go on, and you're the guy. And will you please do this?" And I said, "Well, we're very close. Of course, I'm not gonna say no to you." But I did say, I need you to make a public statement about this and explain what's going on because I don't want to be viewed as some sort of ambulance chasing bass player, and you're sick and here, I want the gig. It's not like that. And he said, no, I know, I know. I've already got the press statement written and I'll get that out there for you. And I said, okay, well, yeah, I will. But Chris, it's under the banner, you're coming back. And then the conversation turned to, me telling him, look, I had friends who had this kind of cancer and they're still living. So you're going to come through this, and trying to be a real positive force in his life. Now, mind you, from the time he was diagnosed to gone was 6 weeks, which is really fast.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
So things were moving real quickly. And it was kind of sadly going downhill for him very quickly. But I was trying to really reinforce that you can beat this kind of thing. And those conversations towards week 5 started getting kind of heavier. And he's like, look, Billy, I'm not gonna make it. And I need you to tell me that you're gonna do this. And I want you to do this. So I have.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah. It was the heaviest thing that's happened to me since I lost my dad, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, you clearly love all of this music. You clearly started as a fan who ended up,
Yeah. Well,
in shoes that you never expected to have to fill.
we all thought that Chris was going to be the Keith Richards of Yes, and he'd be the last man standing. Nobody ever expected Chris to not be there. He was the only guy in the band who was always there. And so it made me doing what I was about to do. And we started heading towards the tour, and we lost him. And it was like, holy cow, this is actually now what I'm going to do. And the emotions ranged from complete fear to shock and sadness. And I kept thinking, oh my God, if we go out and do this and it doesn't work, it's almost tantamount to where this started for me, where they wanted me to be the lead singer. If this doesn't work, this is going to all be my fault. It's, they're only going to point and go, oh, well, this is why this didn't work. So I was slightly petrified, but I had a confidence because I'd spoken to Chris about it in those last few days on such a level. He's like, dude, you got this. You're the only guy I want to do this. And it made me kind of sad when he told me how many people were calling him.
Mm.
And I don't want to get into names, but it really broke my heart when I heard, wow. And I said to him, he called you and actually said that, you know what I mean? It was weird. It was a weird time.
Like
But
people looking for eyeing for the gig.
bass players, yeah, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
it rubbed me wrong. I thought, oh my God, that's horrible. But so I did it, and then we lost Chris, and that tour was probably the hardest tour I've ever done in my career because the first night I went out there and stood there, I felt guilty as hell for actually standing there because this is Chris's spot, man. What the hell? What am I doing here? I've stood on stage with Yes before, but these feelings of guilt and sadness and sorrow and trying to perform and still be joyful, which is what you're supposed to do on stage. I mean, Chris told me, I don't want you to go on stage and be sad. I want you to go on stage and do what you do, and I know what you do. So just do what you do. I don't want you to try to be me, be you, and just do what you do. This is going to work. That was kind of where he was trying to get my head to be. But it was really hard for me to get my head to be there because I kept looking at, and the strangest things would trigger emotions. We play On Over the Lonely Heart, and that bass line in the middle, boo, doo, doo, I'd be okay. And then I'd play that and just start losing it and have to turn around and sort of walk back towards the drums because I didn't want to see people, have people seeing me crying on stage with Yes, but it was all fast and furious, and the emotions were really raw, and it was super heavy. And it
And
took
the Mesa recording came out uh, right before he died, right?
it was right around that time, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the weirdest thing is that it was on like a weird full circle of my career and what I really wanted to do. Because when I was 12 and saw Going for the One, my buddy Kim Goldsberry took me to see this concert because my brother was busy and couldn't take me. And Mike, my brother, said, "Take Billy, he's gonna love this. He's a Yes fan." And I said to Kim, you can ask him, after the show was over, he's like, "What do you think?" I said, "Man, one day I'm going to join this band." I'm 12 years old, but it was like, one day I'm going to join this band. You know what I mean? And it so happens it's worked out this way in a double-edged sword way with this role. When I was in the band before playing guitar, I made my own position. There had never been that role with Yes, and I created my own position, and I felt okay with that. This was different. So the entire tour cycle of that was was crazy, and to have Toto out on the road with us was full circle back to where they started my career. By producing my first record. So there was just this whole range of emotions, but after a couple of years, it started changing. And, about the second tour that I did, I just remember kind of thinking to myself, Chris said, be happy and get on stage and have fun with this. Don't be sad on stage. And so I kind of crossed a divide in my own head and thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And the fans are really what made it possible, because they were so inviting and warm and supportive of all this, in large part because they knew I wasn't some stranger who just walked in on a Tuesday and met Yes and joined. They knew my history. As all of us Yes fans, we dissect the history. We all know what's going on. So they knew what was going on. And that was a real support system for me when I was doing it. It was a very important thing.
I gotta say, I knew when that happened. Uh, I am a Yes fan. I grew up listening to Yes. The
Yeah.
Clap was one of the first hard song I ever really learned, and
Yeah.
I remember when you joined, because it was earth shattering. Like, where's Chris Squire? And then he passes away. But I remember hearing, like, seeing the forums online, and people were saying, well, if there's anyone who can do it, it's Billy Sherwood. And I have friends who are like Yes fanatics, like they, multiple shows following on tour. Everyone loves you. So
Well,
it's really awesome, that you, it's not like you didn't earn it. It's not like you don't deserve it. You're the right guy for this role. And heck, you got the call. No one else
yeah,
got
I
the
mean,
call. You didn't have to try out, right?
I'll never forget that, that one moment in our chat where Chris just blatantly says, "Billy, you're not getting it." It was like, what? And I gotta say, the guys in the band, were really supportive. They knew my relationship with Chris, how close it was, especially Alan, because we'd done things together, the three of us, playing in Chris Squire Experiment and doing touring with Open Your Eyes on the Ladder. He knew how close I was with Chris. So I had this support system from within the band too, especially Jeff Downs, and Steve. And it was just, they made me feel like this is the right place for me to be at this time. And so over these many years, it's I'm honored to do it. I always say that. I don't take the gig lightly. And I every night I go out on stage, I'm always thinking of Chris, and I'm always trying to do my best for him, for myself, and for the Yes fans. And one of the things, well, several of the things we spoke about, but one of the things he always mentioned in those phone calls every time was, take Yes forward. Don't take any prisoners. Go forward with Yes and keep it moving forward. So that, and I was a believer in that when I said to him, I can't have Yes die in my studio. What are we doing? You know what I mean? So we were in that same mindset, and those words just always ring in my head when I go out on stage every night before we play. And I think, yeah, let's move this forward. Why not? This is a great band. The legacy of music is there to enjoy. Of course, I run into, you're always going to run into the guys who, every now and then I'll see a guy online who's like, Yes, died with Chris Squire. And, I'll try not to pipe in, but sometimes it's like a trigger, And there was a dude who said something to that effect recently, and I managed to scan a thread and saw that, and it kind of rubbed me wrong. And I wrote to him and I said, well, look, it was Chris's idea to do this. So if it died with him, why didn't he tell me? You know what I mean? Apparently he wanted the exact opposite. You love Chris, I'm assuming, like I do and did. So this is what he wanted. This was his wishes. So either kind of deal with it and move on, or I don't really have an answer for you, but I'll be at the next Yes show. What do you want from me?
Well, I'll add a couple of things here. That stuff makes me so angry. When people are like, Steve Howe's not the original guitarist, I'm like, the guy's dedicated his life to this
Right.
band. Are you kidding me?
He
And
missed it. He
uh,
missed it by 3 years, I
I,
think.
it's just, oh,
Out of 50 years, he's like he was 3 years late to the party. I think he's original enough for my blood. That's for
oh,
sure.
and then, I run into this a lot because I like to track with what bands are doing. Even the Beat Project, people are like, well, if Robert Fripp's not in it, it's not King Crimson. It's like, just be,
I
or people saying, I'm not going to go out see a cover band. Like, I just want to
I
strangle some of these
know.
people.
I know. I used to tangle with people online when I was younger. I just turned 60 and I can say this now, when I was younger. I used to get into it, but it doesn't bother me anymore because people are going to be in people are in their yes bubble and they want to remain, remember when they took shrooms or acid and went and saw Tales of Topographic Oceans and okay, so I'll leave you in that bubble. But the reality is, it's 2025. Yes, it's making records. We're on to another record as we speak in the studio. There's tours coming, and that's the other funny thing is, as we're talking about this sort of internet, people. I'll get that. Well, it's not yes to me, and I'll say to them, it's very funny because every time I turn around on stage, there's a 50-foot yes logo staring at me on this screen that I'm help paying for. So I don't know. It feels pretty yes to me.
That's good. Yeah, and I've seen you play a few times with Yes, and I mean, it to me, there's no difference. I mean, it's incredible. You have the sound, you have the style, you fit everything. You fit in. I mean, you are as much as Chris Squire could be in Yes
Oh,
today.
that's very sweet. That's
Uh,
sweet. And by the same token, I feel because I got Jay into Yes. Jay Shellen, was been my wingman for 3 decades plus. He played on my first solo album. Uh, and I used to say to him back in the day, one day, man, you might be in Yes too. And he go, you think? I'm like, "Well, it's very possible, if they wanted me in the band, it could happen one day. And it turned out that, the way that our circle was of friends, Alan White was in Conspiracy first, and then Jay came in after him. So they had a relationship going way, way back. And then when I formed Circa with Tony Kaye and Alan and Jimmy Hahn, when Alan went back to Yes to start working again, we needed a drummer. Jay came in, so there's this incestuous thing in the drum department there. And Jay, I think, has done an amazing job of honoring Alan's playing and bringing his own game to the table. I'll never forget one of the first things I said to Jay, because I was introduced to Jay. He played on the second World Trade album. And my partner in World Trade, Bruce Gowdy, I said, so who are we going to get to play drums? He's like, I got this guy, Jay Shellen. You got to meet him. I said, cool, bring him over. So Jay comes over to my studio and I said, who's your first question? I said, who's your favorite drummer? And he goes, got to be Alan White. I said, oh, I think this is going to work really well, you and I.
well, we just happen to have the potential next guitarist of Yes on the call as well, the guitar tech for Steve Howe.
There you go.
Andre Chumley. Andre, we got to get some of your thoughts on this whole
Well,
Yes
no,
thing.
this is great to hear. And excuse me, one thing that's great that you brought up is King Crimson, because that's such a parallel discussion. And excuse me, I've also been fortunate to work with a lot of my heroes, not performing, well, some of them in the Zappa world for sure, but in the King Crimson world and the Yes world, I've gotten to work with so many of the different eras, so many different people, from Tony Kaye on some tours and Mraz on a show or two, all the way through. But I think a
Adrian
very
Belew and
well, if I
Greg Lake.
well, yes, look, I was just listening to Yes people, but yeah, if I switch over to Crimson, exactly. Um, I've been fortunate to work with all three of the main singers, Greg and Adrian and John Wetton, and Trey Gunn. We've done a show or two with him, and a bunch with Tony. The list is boring for people because this isn't my show. But the what I want to make the point I want to make connecting there that you said, Anthony, is so true. As Crimson fans, we go through that same thing of people like that's not really Crimson. Only the Red album is Crimson. Then you have someone else who only the Lark's Tongue album. Then I meet a few people who they hate everything other than the first album because that's the only real one. Then there's people who don't own like only like the 80s. And I chuckle at all of it because what they miss, same thing they miss with Yes, that the early members of Yes, the early members of King Crimson, Robert Fripp himself, have always said, Robert Fripp is always saying, I'm in the room and music arrives and tells me. So there's this beautiful philosophy that they both bands have that we're just pulling this stuff out of the air. This band, Yes, this band, King Crimson, it's a movement, it's a spirit, it's this thing. And we're lucky that right now we're doing this record. And so it's funny to me because they've both bands have kind of said that the whole time and kind of said, we're going to keep changing, evolving, but there's a spirit here. There's a beautiful, and so that's how I approach it as a fan. I love all the eras. I love all the different things. And that's why it's great coming full circle to this tour again too, though. That's why I think what's cool is that Billy had stuff going on before he got involved with Yes. He was already doing the world trade. And then he has this arc, well, arc of life, but he has this arc of Yoso and Circa and all these things where he's in this kind of family tree with all these different people. And this tour, as we talked about putting it together, a lot of it's a celebration of kind of 30 years of Billy's music. And Yes really is only mentioned a little bit. And it really shows, again, that he's got this huge ecosystem of different progressive rock, power pop.
Yeah.
Some of it's kind of punk rock sounding, some of it's kind of total progressive, some of it's from the Gentle Giant influence. I really like that this set list that he's going to be doing takes you through a lot of years and you know, maybe talk about the set list a little bit, Billy, without
It's
giving
funny,
away
it's
surprises.
it's funny you mentioned that because I mean, well, the surprises will be given probably in about 36 hours right after the first show. But it I chose songs when I started thinking about what to play. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to sort of be able to pull a song from almost every band that I created and was involved with along my path? There's not enough time to do that in a set, but I managed to, start with Logic, where we get Lonely Man, which was the first single off the record that I wrote back in the day. And then it goes into World Trade, which was was the next band I created with Bruce Gowdy after Logic. And and then we start getting into Conspiracy, which is right around World Trade where I met Chris, and that started Conspiracy and it's interesting, we're playing The More We Live, which was the original version that's on the Conspiracy record before it became a Yes song. And we're also playing a song called Open Your Eyes, which was the title track of the Yes record, of course. But before that, it was called Wish I Knew, and it was involved with Conspiracy. So I think the audience will, get an interesting perspective of this sort of timeline of the career. And, I plan on letting them in on what they're hearing, in between certain numbers, explaining what we just did and how it links to this thing that we did here. And one of those links for me that I found interesting, especially when we played the full set, finally the last few days and got a feel for it, is to be able to play Lonely Man at the very front of the set. Now, I haven't played, the last time I played that song, we were opening up for Supertramp at the Universal Amphitheater. I was 20, and it was an amazing thing. And I remember thinking, I'm going to go pick up my Maserati and I'm moving to Beverly Hills. Of course, things change and you lose your record deal. You're like, holy cow, I'm at the bar now going, what do we do next? And then form World Trade. But that's a musical career. You got to keep slugging it out and you create music that endures along the way. But going from that stage all the way up through, and obviously, as I said, the guys at Toto producing my first record, I'm playing a song from an album called Kingdom of Desire by Toto. The song's called The Other Side that I wrote with David Paich that's on that album. And that's Jeff Porcaro's last record, sadly. And Jeff is actually the one who discovered Logic back in the day. He was the first of the Toto crew to come into the room. We were rehearsing at Leeds in North Hollywood and minding our own business. In the door flies open and it's Jeff Porcaro and he stands there with his arms folded watching us. And we kind of were like, whoa, it's Jeff Porcaro. We didn't know him. We stopped playing and He said, no, don't stop playing, man. Keep playing, play. So we're like, okay. So we start playing. And then he turns around and splits. And I stopped the band and I said, I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Did he like it or hate it? Or what just happened there? I'm not sure. Couple seconds later, the door swings open and he had gone to get David Page and his brother Steve, Carl. And he said, play that song about the red light. We had this song called Red Light. Play the song about the red light. So we played it again. And that was the moment where, my career and the other guys as well in the band, that's where it all started right there. That was the spark that kicked off the whole thing. So to be able to play the other side, which came all these years later, it's just a kind of an interesting full circle in the set. So, I'm going to explain that to the audience when we're playing. It's why I chose this material to play and what it means to me. And hopefully when they walk away from it, the next time they listen to it, they'll have a different view of what that song really means, and all those kind of things along the way. So it's an interesting set of music, and it's got some Citizen in there from my Citizen albums. It's got Circa and Yes, and a track from the John Wetton album, as I mentioned, and there's a few other surprises in there which I don't want to give away. But in this world of the internet, it's not going to be a surprise for very long, But for now, the first show, they'll get the surprise.
The John Wetton record, by the way, that's one we should almost do a feature on here one day, because that record, it's late in John's life. I think he passed about 3 years later, 4 years later. And it's a great record, and it's mostly John and Billy. And there's a couple of great guests, Steve Morse, my boss, sometimes Eddie Jobson's on there. I remember we were on tour when he flew his solo in. So that's a great record. Now, of course, we'll have a link here to remind people, billysherwoodmusic.com for tickets and all that stuff. And it's all in the Northeast, but there'll be more touring coming up.
What's interesting about, what you're talking about, that John Wetton record,
Yeah.
that is the reason why, another strange twist of fate, because Wetton was one of my heroes, for UK being one of my all-time favorite prog bands, so Wetton's way up there in the stock for me. And so when I did that record, to be able to hang with him on an intimate, 30 days at my home studio, just me and him one-on-one, laughing and sharing stories, because we all knew the same people at that point. And he was such an amazing, warm, kind soul, as you know. And then when we lost him, he requested that I take his spot in Asia for that tour that they did, where we opened up, and I did. We played we did, I think it was 38 shows or something, opening up for Journey. And I found myself kind of reliving what had happened with Yes, but now it's happening with Wetton. And there was a particular moment playing The Smile Has Left Your Eyes, where it's just me and Jeff. Jeff's playing keys and I'm just singing the song. And in this arena, behind me is a massive LED screen with a picture of John, great picture of John. And the audience has got their the phones out, like with the lighters on them. And I've done a lot of cool things, but I've never been the lead singer of the band and played arenas, so that tour was super special. And in that moment, I was supposed to sing the last refrain, and I'm looking out at the audience and I'm seeing the lighters, and I'm starting to kind of choke up trying to get these lyrics out, it was pretty emotional, and I couldn't get it out. And I turned around and walked past Jeff as he was playing the last chords. He's kind of looking at me like, where are you going? And I just kind of nodded at him like, I just can't, and he gave me a nice warm nod. And it happened one time, but it hit me like a ton of bricks in that moment. Like, wow, it was really hard with Chris, and here we are again. What is my life? How has this happened? Because it's not like I've replaced the guy in, Warrant or some band that I wasn't terribly interested in. Nothing against Warrant, but I was a fan of progressive rock music. I loved rock and roll, but progressive rock is where my soul was. And I was somehow replacing all my heroes,
Well,
I asked Eric Schulman at one point. I was making a record after that. I was making a prog collective, and I called him and I said, hey man, I know you don't sing anymore. It's not your thing, but if you could just do one overdub for me, I'd just love it. And he goes, I can't do that. Everyone you work with is dropping, what the hell?
Well, I got to say, Billy, you're either the unluckiest guy I've ever met, or the luckiest. I love what Peter Gabriel said. He knows he's in the right place, doing the right thing when coincidences start happening all
Right.
around him. I think you're kind of that guy, and it is pretty wild how you put something out in the universe. I've had this happen on a much smaller scale than you, but like uh, when I was a kid, I heard Steve Vai on the radio, and it just blew my mind. That was the day I knew I was going to play electric guitar.
Yeah.
And then my dad gets home from work. I'm listening to the album, and he's like, "What are you listening to?" I said, "Some guy named Steve Vai," and he's like, "Oh, Steve played on our first album." It's like, and then
Uh,
suddenly that day I had an appointment to meet Steve, and then like I studied King Crimson music, and many years later, just a couple years ago, Robert Fripp invited me to his house. It's like
uh,
these kinds of things where in your head you think there's just wouldn't it be nice, wouldn't it be crazy? But you put in all of the time, the dedication, the love, you really invest in it. And then those artists reach out to you and they're like, man, you're great. I love that you put all of this love into it. And it's like you become part of it in a way that you just never intended?
it is a bizarre. I used to really sort of almost feel guilty for the things I've been able to do in my career, and then I crossed a threshold where I'm like, you know what, I'm just going with this, and Chris and I were so close that that whole thing it felt like the exact right thing to do because he was one of my closest friends, and there was just no way I was going to say no to him to do what I'm doing.
Hmm.
There was a
Hmm.
very funny moment that I was just reminded of, Chris and I on tour. I forget which tour it was. I think it was during the latter. And we are hammered out of our tree at some bar after a show. And he looks at me out of the blue and he goes, "Billy, just admit it." And I said, "What, Chris? Admit what?" He goes, "I'm your favorite bass player, aren't I?" And I said, "You're so close." And he looks at me, he goes, "Jocko." I said, "Come on, man. Yeah, it's Jocko." I said, "But you're right there. You're so close, dude."
That's a beautiful second.
Oh,
You know, let me say too, Billy is in the middle of doing these rehearsals, programming stuff, and we squeezed this in today. So thank you, Anthony, for making
yeah,
this
thank
happen.
you. Thank
But
you.
but also Billy, who is now going to be, I think, a power viewer of Make Weird Music. You don't know this, but you're looking at perhaps the biggest Gentle Giant fan. Let's say at least in the Western
Yeah.
hemisphere is Anthony, and he's interviewed the guys. He's done Gentle Giant music on the channel that he plays himself. So you're gonna love the Gentle Giant
I got a great
friendship with Anthony because
I got a
he's
great Gentle Giant story.
okay.
Go
I
for
saw
it.
their last show ever at the Roxy in 1980,
Oh, man.
right?
Wow,
And
wow,
it was an amazing show about diehard Gentle Giant. I love Civilian. I think it's great. A
love
lot
it,
of Gentle Giant fans are like, "I don't want to know." I thought it was cool. Perfect.
love it.
Anyway, so I go see Gentle Giant, and you know how the Roxy is. There's that parking lot in the back on the other side of the rainbow. It's like you go down that little road, and I'm parked in the back, and there's when you go to your car, if you turn around and you look at the building of the Roxy, there on the second floor, there's these windows that you can open, the dressing room windows, right? And you can get some air when you're in there and you're in the dressing room. So I walk the gigs over. My mind is blown at what I'd just seen, which was an amazing concert. I mean, for a last show, it was like, oh my God, that was mind blowing. And so I'm walking to my car and I turn around to look at the building. And it just so happens that Derek Schulman is opening the window to get stick his head out and get some fresh air. He's obviously, burning up from what he just done.
Yep.
And so I yell out to him, "Yo, Derek." And he goes, "What's up, mate?" And I said, "Don't stop this band. You got to keep this going." And he just kind of chuckled. But little did I know that that would be the guy who introduced me to Yes.
No kidding, right?
I mean, what a weird, when you're talking about fate and all that,
Oh,
that
yeah.
is, I mean, so it's just, it's a blessing that, I'm able to do the kind of music that I love in my heart. And and to be able to go now and do it in the solo tour. And I got to say, while we're here, is that I wouldn't. Andre's the most part of why I'm doing what I'm doing, because he really said, "Why aren't you doing this?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, should I do this? I don't." He's like, "You should do this. Yes, you should do." I said, "How do I do it?" He's like, "I'll help you do it. We'll get this going." And he's been such a driving force behind this, and I really feel like it. We've got this team thing going, and I'm just so happy, and just want to tell Andre thank you in front of the world, and all the above. That it's an amazing opportunity, and
It-
I've taken it super seriously. I mean, I don't think I've slept in the last 5 weeks. My keyboard player says, "I didn't get to sleep last night till 4 in the morning." I said, "Sleep. I've read about that in books." So where's that one?
well,
I think
well, yeah.
the best artists are the reluctant, humble, authentic ones who are so unsuspecting that they might be great.
That that's very good. And yes, thank you, Billy, and you're welcome. And
Yeah.
I've been a fan since Union, when you came on the radar, and you'd
Yeah.
always see that name. Wow, this guy's doing this. But I'll say real quick, when I finally met you, we were on the cruise. I think 2012 or something. I did a cruise with Greg Lake, and I remember walking with Robin, who we works with you sometimes on. We
Yeah.
just did a Yes tour together, but
Yeah.
we were walking along in one of the, far away from any of the stages or anything. It was up in one of the balconies. We were coming through, and I said, "Oh my God, I think that's." And there you were during the cruise where shows are going on. You had your headphones, you're in front of a laptop, and we said hi, and you were like mixing an album. And
Yeah.
so like,
Probably.
even on a cruise at like, it was like 1 in the morning. And I was like, wow. And I'll always remember that, because every tour I've done with you, I find you in the hotel lobby or backstage
Yeah.
or after
Yeah.
sound check, because you're always working on the next
Yeah.
album and stuff.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit, though, in this tour, again, your first full-on solo tour.
Yeah.
What are some of the other goals besides the great set list? You got this great band together. What are you looking forward to for these 11 gigs, and just
Well, I mean,
the boss?
just to get this music out there, and it feels, I mean, it's obviously amazing to play Yes music, and those tours are always just so much fun to do, and super challenging, which is one of the reasons I've always loved being involved with Yes, because it's a challenge. And I'm finding that putting this set together and being able to play my own music and put my own stuff together, it's as much a challenge, because I don't know. I did some pretty crazy things in the studio, and now I have to get them to figure out how to pull that off on stage, right? So I started on this months ago. Basically when we were on the road, it was like, okay, let me think about what I would really want to play. And then now getting into the production, I think people are going to be really pleasantly surprised with how it's going to sound. And part of that is the technical aspect that I use, because I'm a control freak when it comes to audio. And I'm not going to necessarily let some guy I've never met at front of house at a club tell me the drums sound great and believe him. I got to hear it with my own ears. So I've done this with Circa and with Yoso, and other things that I've toured on, on a club level, if you will. Each guy in the band, if you can imagine, has his own console, automated console. And I spend time with them to get the drum sound dialed like as if we were going to track and make a record. And I get it to that sort of record level standard of like that Hugh Padgham, beautiful, drum sound that I've loved to strive for. And then I move to the next guy, and I get his keyboard sounding, the way that we need to. And I'll, if we need some delay or some reverb to soak it, and some top end to make the glassy on top and all that kind of stuff, then do the same treatment with the guitar player and myself and my bass sound and stuff. And when I'm done, the faders that go to front of house sit at basically at zero, and the mix kind of plays itself because everything is automating. When the solos kick in, they change patches. It's a different patch. It's here, and it's within striking range, if you will, so that whoever is mixing front of house, I can basically tell them, babysit this mix, but if you think you need a little more solo, turn the guitar up, but please just bring it back to zero so that it'll do its thing. So on that front, I'm feeling really good about how the sound is going to be produced in these places, because I don't know if people are going to like expect to hear it like that, but it's going to be like a record in there, which is something that I love. And because I can put my head at my mind at ease, knowing when I'm in ears and hearing my own world that what's out there is like representing what I want it to be representing, and not just a mishmash of someone's opinion of what a drum blend is. You know what
Well,
I
I
mean?
think a band plays so much better and more like securely. They feel better about what they're doing when it
Yeah.
sounds good to them. Even in their own ears, you don't always know what's happening out beyond the PA. But when you're
Yeah.
getting it in your ears and you're blending in and you've got everything you need,
I
it's
mean,
like it's a
it,
foundation.
it's one thing, touring with Yes, where the professionals, Dean Metzen out there in the
Sure.
front, nailing it, and our monitor mixer, it's nailing it. Simone is nailing it. You're in such great hands that these thoughts of like insecure sound, they don't even come into the
Sure,
fray.
yeah.
But when you're touring it kind of, to be
Club
honest,
level.
on a club level, it's
Yeah.
risky, and there's smaller venues, and so that sound could get so out of control that things go haywire, and the songs are the things that suffer. This way, the songs are the things that are really delivered in the right way, so people can actually understand what kind of thing you're trying to tell them via the song, and get the storytelling through.
So I know we do need to wrap, but I do have one more question for you.
What's that?
I just crazily enough woke up to an email, like a nice long email from Bill Bruford, which was really nice.
Cool.
And he said he's never recorded over the internet. He's never like received tracks from
Not
someone.
true.
Okay, well, I'm using his words, not mine. But I'm curious, like, is Yes still a band that goes to the studio and needs to do this, or is Yes doing more of the separate, thing?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a hybrid, and we visit the studio and we do what we do there, and then we go home, and I've got my setup and my bass rig at home in my flat with my girlfriend in London, and I make records right there. So, I'm comfortable there. I'll do my overdubs there where I can really take my time and wake up the next morning, have a cup of coffee, and listen to it again and go, oh, okay, wait a minute. Maybe I will try this in that area today. And so I think that the benefits of being able to do it remotely, for the lack of a better word, outweigh the benefits of, okay, we're going to be in the studio between 2 and 6 and it better happen. There's so much pressure on that I don't know, but we still track live drums. I just tracked live drums with Jay Shellen. I engineered the session because the band sort of trusts me to get good drum sounds and all that kind of stuff. So we just completed drums on that. And it works. At the end of the day, it still feels live and like we're in a room. I mean, listen to Mirror of the Sky. You wouldn't know that we weren't all in a room together. But the reality is, we weren't in a lot of cases. But I don't think that affects the process too much. But it's interesting what you say about Bill, that he's never done a remote session, because I got to be honest, you should remind him. Yes, you did. Because you remember when he retired, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank goodness he's come out of retirement, because he's such an amazing drummer that it's like, please come back. But I caught him on just at the leading edge of his retirement, and he did a session for me. He's on a Dark Side of the Moon tribute playing Money. And I sent him the files, and he tracked and sent me his files. And so, I mean, that constitutes a remote session, doesn't it?
Could, could that be his assistant or his studio person though?
Well, I don't know who engineered it, but it's his drumming. You can tell
Right,
for
right.
sure.
I'm gonna have to tell Bill first thing.
Tell
Hey,
Yeah,
Bill.
yeah.
just so you know, Billy Sherwood said you were wrong. That's okay.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
okay.
Just remind him.
No,
And
that,
I'll tell you why I remember this so strongly, because when he sent me the track, it was so good and so Bill. And I'm such a huge fan of his from UK and Yes and Crimson. And I was so blown away that I wrote to him and said, thank you so much for participating on this record. The drums are amazing. Please, is there any way I could, could you, could we possibly still have a line open to do more? Please, And he wrote me back and he said, I really appreciate that, but I am truly retiring from drums. So as much as I would love to, I'm just putting my sticks down for now. And I thought, oh, what a heartbreaking thing to hear. But obviously, and to be fair, what's interesting is now that just thinking about this, I got one of his last sessions before he retired. And I was there the night he came out of retirement, because we did Trading Boundaries, this gig for John Wetton sort of memorial concert we had there at Trading Boundaries.
Hmm.
And Bill came out of retirement that night and played some blues jam.
Yep. Actually,
So
he told me about that, and
how weird is that? I didn't even think of that till just now.
he we were at the Moon June Music Festival in Spain in September, and I was able to give him an award, which was kind of crazy, but we got to hang out and talk, and I said, "Did you really not play drums?" And he said, "I literally did not play the drums." I'm like, "You didn't like secretly play the drums?" And he said, "I have a kit in my room." It sounded like in his bedroom, but possibly in like a room where he studies or writes. And he said every day he looked at the kit and said, "Not today." And he said for over a decade, I think it was 12 years, he genuinely didn't play. And the reason I asked is because I said, "When was the last time you played drums?" And he said, "Actually, it was at John Wetton's funeral." And he said, ever since then, I've been relearning to play the drums. And I said, "What do you mean? Like you did it for 50 years or something and relearn?" And he said, "You'd be surprised how much you forget when you don't do something for 12 years." And he
Yeah.
said he couldn't really play. Like he could do the fundamentals, but his sound was gone. He felt completely unfamiliar. It's pretty wild. Hopefully we'll get to talk more about that.
Well, I mean, that was one of my favorite things about doing that. I was playing in that same show, right?
Mhm.
I played with Downs in Asia. Um, it was so cool to see him do that, and it was just I remember thinking, "Oh my god, this is, like, amazing. He's back. He's gonna do this." So, it was really exciting, but yeah, I hadn't even connected that dot until this conversation we're having. It's like, "Whoa, yeah, I got his last overdub and saw him come out of retirement as well. How bizarre is that?"
Yeah,
You know?
I told
that's
you
pretty amazing.
you're the luckiest guy on earth or the
Guess
unluckiest.
so.
Zelig,
I
musical Zelig.
I need to get back
Um,
to Vegas to do some gambling, you know?
All right, so Andre, I'm gonna let you close this one out. As the tour manager, tell us, how do we support Billy on tour? What's going on? Where are the shows? When are they happening? All that stuff.
Yeah, well, it's an exciting tour. It's pretty much the northeast quadrant of the USA. What's been great. I've been doing a bunch of work with City Winery over the past few years, Adrian Belew shows and the celebrating Zappa stuff. So we've got 4 City Winery shows. What a great, perfect size place for what Billy's doing. So we have City Winery in Philly, Pittsburgh, New York, and Boston. And then we've got a really special kind of private show. I think it's sold out, but people can look at the Museum of Music Technology, which was formerly EMEAP, EMEAPP, the synthesizer place. So that's going to be a real special kind of an extended meet and greet almost. And we should do something with them also, Anthony, because they have the largest synthesizer and amplifier and pedal collection now in North America. They have everyone's gear, all the Zappa amps and effects and stuff. So we're doing a show there, and then Billy's going up to New Hampshire, and there's a show in Southern Vermont, couple in Connecticut. So kind of a Northeast jaunt. But I want people to go to billysherwoodmusic.com. Follow the links. We got the ticket links right there. Follow Billy Sherwood HQ on Instagram and all that. And we're in a time where things have to go viral. You got to tell your friends about it, like because there's the free papers aren't there anymore, and we're not all listening to the same radio stations. But the response we've had so far is great. The people who know about it have been super excited because they've never had a chance to see Billy solo in all these years. So we're really excited, and we just want to get the word out.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
tell your friends.
Come on
And
out.
then one more thing to say on supporting. Thanks for Anthony. Always really make sure we're thinking about how musicians can thrive in the 21st century. Billy is working right now on getting his whole catalog up on Bandcamp and making sure it's everywhere. It's streaming, it's Bandcamp, but most importantly, Bandcamp, because the prog rock fan base, the art music fan base, has been fantastic with supporting and buying things, even in the download streaming era. It's actually really a great thing. And Bandcamp, we love. We love that first Friday thing where there's no percentage taken. So it's quite incredible that artists have this possibility. and Billy is talking to some people right now to pull together all his different albums from the different labels and put it in one spot.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
All right,
Yeah.
Billy, it was really great meeting you. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this great conversation. Andre, thanks for setting it up.
Thank
And
you, Anthony.
yeah, you're
Welcome.
welcome. And let's close out with the track called You Make It Real by Arc of Life. Billy, you want to just provide any sort of context here?
I just kind of wrote this song about my son actually, and just keeping things real and in your life, and being positive about life, and kind of just going for anything you desire in life, and just don't say no, just go for it. And that's kind of what it's all about, is just keeping things very, very real.
Awesome. Let's check it out. You Make It Real. And the band is called Arc of Life. So if you look it up, that's ARC of Life. Here we go. Theoretically.
You make it real. You make me feel alive again. You make it real. You make me feel alive again. In the silence of the moment, words get in the way. No more time for wondering just when the storm clouds will be gathering.
Billy, I gotta say, I started tearing up at the end. I have a son who's, I'm gonna start crying. He's moving out for college this August, so
I mean, that's what it's all about, is the future. And there it is, it's basically a message of positivity, I mean, my favorite band was Yes growing up. It's no wonder that it's a positive thing, man.
yeah. All right, I'm gonna lose it if I keep this conversation going.
Sorry, man.
Beautiful. No,
It is beautiful. Yeah, just knowing
the
why you
spirit.
wrote it and hearing it and thinking of him.
Yeah.
I gotta go. I'm literally gonna lose
Okay,
it.
brother.
Thank you, guys.
Next time
See
I'll
you
bring a
soon.
dark song, and let's do a bummer. I'll bring a bummer song.
Yeah, well, let me know if you bump into Weird Al over there.
All right, man. I gotta catch a flight, but look,
Whenever.
it's been such a pleasure. Andre, thank you, and Anthony, thank you. And anytime you guys want to do this again, I'm happy to. It was a lot of fun. It was
Right
To
on.
be continued.
Thank you,
No?
Billy. All
All
right,
right,
thanks,
guys. I'll
Andre.
see you later. I'm gonna go
Okay.
catch
See you
a plane.
guys.
I'm gonna go catch a red eye soon. Ciao.
Okay,
Love
have a
you
good
guys.
one. Bye.
You guys.
Cheers.